The snow was heavy that night in Silver Creek when little Emily and her dog Rex stopped at the forest's edge. Just ahead, a police car clung to the cliffside, one wheel already slipping into the void. Through the shattered windshield, a young female officer lay unconscious, her face covered in blood. Emily never screamed because Rex had already raced back to call her father, Jack, a war veteran. Jack didn't know it yet, but saving this officer would pull his family into a terrifying danger that threatened the entire town. Before we begin this powerful story of courage and silent sacrifice, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you believe in these hidden heroes, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Wishing you a peaceful day. The winter night had fallen deep over Silver Creek, a small mountain town shrouded beneath the relentless curtain of snow and silence. It was the kind of night where the world seemed frozen in time. Every roofline bowed under the weight of white, every breath forming clouds that lingered too long in the icy air. Within the front yard of a modest wooden house, 5-year-old Emily played cheerfully, her laughter muffled by the thick blanket of snow. She was a small, delicate child with bright blonde hair that escaped in wisps from beneath her woolen cap, cheeks glowing pink from the cold as she pressed snow into clumsy shapes. Beside her stood Rex, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a sable coat of black and tan, sturdy and muscular, his amber eyes gleaming with alertness. Loyal and intelligent, Rex had always been her silent protector, watching each move with patience and instinct sharper than any human's. Tonight, however, his calm gaze suddenly sharpened into unease. At first, Emily did not notice the shift in Rex's posture. She giggled, pushing together the uneven body of her snowman, humming quietly to herself. Then the low growl rumbled deep in Rex's throat, vibrating against the still night. His ears snapped upright, his muscles tensed beneath his fur, and his breath came in sharp bursts of steam. Emily froze, the small handful of snow slipping from her mitten. "Rex?" she whispered, the innocence of her voice carried away by the wind. Suddenly, Rex barked, short, forceful, insistent, and it was not the bark of playful excitement, but the desperate alarm of danger. Emily jumped, startled, and before she could protest, the dog nudged her shoulder roughly with his head, tugging at the hem of her coat with his teeth. Confused, but instinctively trusting, Emily let herself be pulled, stumbling across the snow as Rex dragged her away from the safety of the yard toward the dark edge of the forest. The snow fell harder now, flakes driven slantwise by the wind, the world narrowing to the dim glow of the porch light shrinking behind them. Emily's small boots crunched in the drifts, her breath shallow and frightened, but Rex pressed on, urgency burning in every step. She clung to his fur as if he were both guide and shield, too young to question, too loyal to resist. Ahead, the shadowed tree line loomed, branches heavy with ice, whispering as the wind tore through them. Somewhere beyond that threshold, something terrible was waiting. As they broke into the woods, the sound reached her first, a hollow creak of metal under strain, a faint groan that did not belong to the forest. Emily's eyes widened, her fears swelling as Rex pulled her toward a narrow path descending into the trees. There, through the veil of snow, she saw it, the twisted frame of a police car, its headlights half buried, its body tilted precariously on the lip of a ravine. The vehicle had skidded off the road, snowbank crumbled beneath its weight, leaving it hanging, with only gravity's patience keeping it from plunging into the abyss below. Emily gasped, clutching Rex's neck as they stopped at the edge of the slope. The sight was terrifying in its fragility. The windshield had shattered into a spiderweb of jagged glass, glinting faintly in the erratic sweep of the headlights. Through the broken pane, slumped against the steering wheel, was a woman in uniform. She appeared no older than her mid-30s, with dark hair matted to her forehead, blood glistening against pale skin where it streamed down from a vicious wound. Her police jacket was torn at the shoulder, dusted with snow as if nature itself tried to bury her. Her head lolled slightly, eyes shut tight, lips parted but motionless. The stillness of her body carried a terrible weight, the kind that made Emily's young heart clench with a fear she could not fully understand. Emily whimpered, taking a frightened step back, but Rex would not allow her to retreat. He barked again, louder this time, sharp against the roar of the storm. The sound echoed against the trees, bouncing into the night like a flare of urgency. Then, With another firm tug at Emily's coat, Rex spun her toward the path leading back to the cabin. He knew what had to be done. Emily stumbled after him, snow kicking up around her boots as her small legs tried to keep pace. The dog's breath steamed like smoke in the night, his paws punching prints into the untouched white as he dragged the child back through the storm. The cabin came into view again, its dim light flickering against the blizzard, a beacon of warmth and safety. Emily burst through the front yard, tears stinging her eyes not only from the cold, but from the image still burning in her mind, the blood, the broken glass, the woman who seemed caught between life and death. Jack was inside, sitting near the fire, the fatigue of long days carved into the lines of his face. A man in his 40s, tall and muscular, his dark hair streaked with silver and his expression often guarded, Jack carried the weight of his years as a veteran, a man who had seen both loyalty and betrayal on battlefields far from home. But no battle prepared him for the urgency in his daughter's trembling voice. "Daddy," Emily cried, crashing into the room, Rex bounding at her side. "There's a car. It's going to fall. She's hurt." The words tumbled out in fragments, her small hands clinging to Jack's sleeve. Jack immediately stiffened, his instincts snapping alive like a switchblade drawn in the dark. He glanced at Rex, who barked once, sharp and commanding, then darted toward the door as if daring him to follow. Jack's heart pounded. He had learned long ago that Rex's instincts were never wrong. Without hesitation, he grabbed his heavy coat from the hook, shoved his arms through, and followed his daughter and the dog back into the storm. The night swallowed them instantly, the warmth of the fire replaced by the sharp bite of wind that clawed at his face. Jack's boots crunched in the snow as he sprinted, Emily clinging to his arm until he set her safely by the yard fence with a firm command not to move. Rex tore ahead, a dark streak against the white leading the way. Jack followed with steady, urgent strides, his breath cutting sharp in the frozen air, his mind already bracing for the unknown. The forest opened before him, the shadows bending under the weight of snow, the slope down toward the ravine glowing faintly with fractured light. And then he saw it. The police car swayed, groaning against the weight of its own frame. Snow fell thicker, smothering sound, yet the horror of the scene cut through all else. Inside the shattered glass, the woman in uniform remained still, blood staining her pale face. Jack's chest tightened as recognition swept through him. Not of her name, but of the battle she was fighting, a battle to breathe, to survive the cruel indifference of winter and the malice of fate. He steadied himself, heart thundering. The car teetered at the edge, moments away from sliding into the abyss. Jack clenched his fists, his eyes narrowing. For a veteran who had pulled comrades from fire and ruin, this was no longer the quiet life he had chosen in Silver Creek. This was survival, raw and immediate, calling him back into action. He turned to Rex, who stood bristling, amber eyes locked on the wreck as though sharing the weight of his decision. Snow swirled around them, the night pressing in heavy and merciless. Jack inhaled sharply, the cold slicing his lungs, and stepped forward into the storm, ready to face the peril that awaited below. The storm raged with merciless strength, wind clawing through the trees and tearing at Jack's coat as he stood above the ravine. The sight of the police car trembling at the edge, threatening to plunge at any second, left no time for hesitation. His breath steamed in violent bursts as he braced himself, every instinct from his years as a soldier roaring back with precision and urgency. With Emily's frightened cries muffled behind him and Rex's growl vibrating through the storm, Jack lowered himself down the slippery slope, each step sinking deep into the snow, each movement echoing the decision that he could not afford to fail. The vehicle creaked under his weight as he gripped the twisted door handle. The woman inside remained slumped against the wheel, her dark hair soaked with blood and snow, the dim light revealing the sharp lines of her face softened now by unconsciousness. Her uniform was disheveled, badge dulled beneath a layer of frost, and her chest rose faintly as if she clung to life by threads of air. Jack pulled hard, the door refusing at first, ice locking it in place like a tomb. His muscles strained, the storm biting into his skin, until with a violent snap, the door gave way. Glass shattered, snow burst inward, and Jack reached in, sliding his arms carefully beneath her limp body. She was heavier than he expected, her body cold, rigid, her pulse faint against his fingers. Jack grunted as he hoisted her into his arms, balancing against the treacherous slope. Above, Rex barked in sharp intervals, circling with ears pinned back, his body tense as though warding off unseen threats. Emily, barely visible against the whipping snow, clutched her flashlight tightly, its beam trembling down toward him, guiding his steps with flickering light. Jack pressed forward, boots slipping but steadying, his jaw clenched as he fought gravity and the storm itself. When he finally reached the top, he laid the woman gently on the ground for only a moment, long enough to adjust his grip. Emily's wide eyes glistened with tears as she whispered, "Is she going to die?" Jack didn't answer. His silence was both shield and promise. He scooped the officer back into his arms and pushed forward, Rex trotting at his side, every muscle of the dog vibrating with urgency. They reached the old pickup truck parked by the cabin, its gray body dusted white, its engine grumbling like an old soldier reluctant to fight another battle. Jack opened the passenger door with his elbow, lifting the unconscious woman onto the worn seat. Her head lolled against the glass, blood smearing faint trails on the frost. Emily climbed into the back, her small frame trembling as she held the flashlight steady, determined to help. Rex leapt into the truck bed, pacing restlessly as the storm hammered down. Jack slid behind the wheel, hands shaking not from fear but from the cold and the weight of responsibility. He twisted the key, the engine coughed, sputtered, then roared. To life, a fragile sound of salvation against the blizzard's howl. The drive was chaos, the road nearly invisible beneath the sheets of snow, the headlights swallowed by the storm. Jack gripped the wheel so hard his knuckles blanched, his eyes narrowed against the white void, every nerve focused on keeping the truck on the unmarked path. Emily knelt on the seat, shining the flashlight on the officer's face, whispering softly as if words alone could keep her alive. "Please don't die," she murmured again and again. Rex barked sharply from the back, his body braced against the jolts, a sentinel even in the chaos. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, the glowing red cross of the Silver Creek Hospital emerged through the storm like a miracle. Jack slammed the brakes, skidding into the parking lot, snow spraying against the sides. He jumped out, flung open the passenger door, and carried the woman inside, his boots striking hard against the sterile tiles. Nurses rushed forward, their faces masked by urgency, hands pulling her from his arms and laying her onto a gurney. A doctor, a thin man in his 50s with gray-streaked hair and tired but steady eyes, barked orders with the precision of someone who had fought many such battles with death. Jack stepped back, chest heaving, snow melting from his shoulders. Emily clung to his leg, staring as they wheeled the officer down the corridor. Rex sat obediently by the entrance, his amber eyes locked on Jack as if awaiting the next command. Minutes stretched long, the storm howling faintly beyond the walls, until finally a nurse returned, her face softening into relief. "She's alive," she said simply. "You got her here just in time." Jack exhaled, the weight of the night pressing heavy, his eyes closing as if only now he could allow himself to feel the exhaustion. The following morning dawned pale and cold, the storm easing but the land still buried deep in white. Jack, refusing to let questions gnaw unanswered, returned to the site of the crash with Rex at his side. The forest was silent now, save for the crunch of boots and the steady huff of the German shepherd. Snow draped everything in fragile beauty, hiding truths beneath its deceptive purity. Jack scanned the wreck, the car now half buried, and felt Rex stiffen. The dog sniffed the ground, circling, then began to dig furiously at a drift near the slope. Snow flew in bursts until the edge of a metal box emerged, cold and rust-streaked, its hinges stiff from frost. Jack knelt, pulling it free, brushing away the snow to reveal a small toolbox. It was ordinary at first glance, but inside lay tools stained with grease and fragments of torn wire. Jack's stomach tightened as recognition set in. These were no ordinary instruments. Someone had tampered with the brake lines. The crash was no accident. His jaw clenched as he shut the box, eyes dark with realization. The storm had not been the enemy last night. It had only masked something far more deliberate. Later, in the hospital room, the woman stirred. Her name, as Jack soon learned, was Officer Constance Hale, 36 years old, sharp-featured with an air of resilience that lingered even through her weakness. Her eyes, though glassy from pain and medication, burned with determination as she met Jack's gaze. "It wasn't an accident," she whispered hoarsely, her voice carrying both warning and truth. "I was closing in on Morton. He runs the smuggling operation through Silver Creek. He wanted me gone." Her lips trembled, but her words cut like steel. Jack listened in silence, his hand resting lightly on Rex's head, the pieces falling into place. For Emily, who sat quietly at the edge of the bed with her small hands folded, the room was heavy with meanings she couldn't yet grasp. But Jack understood fully. The woman had been targeted, her life nearly stolen in the blizzard not by fate, but by human malice. The evidence lay waiting in the snow. Rex's instincts had unveiled it, and now the truth was undeniable. As Constance closed her eyes again, drifting into much-needed rest, Jack knew one thing with clarity. Last night had not been the end of danger, but the beginning of something much larger, and its shadow was already reaching for them. The night after the rescue was quieter on the surface, yet beneath the stillness, Jack sensed an unease that refused to let him rest. The storm had passed, leaving Silver Creek coated in a crystalline silence, the kind of silence that seemed to conceal secrets rather than offer peace. Inside the small cabin, Emily slept soundly against the warmth of the fire, her golden hair spilling across the pillow, innocent of the danger creeping closer. Rex, however, remained restless, pacing near the door, ears twitching as if every gust of wind carried a warning. Jack sat at the table, staring at the toolbox they had uncovered, his thoughts circling back to Officer Hale's whisper of Morton's name. He understood too well what this meant. By pulling her from that car, he and Rex had become witnesses, and witnesses to men like Morton did not live long. Jack made his decision in silence, his heart heavy as he looked toward his daughter. Emily was only 5, too young to understand the stakes, too fragile to stand against the storm of men who silenced those in their way. Before dawn, he packed a small bag of her clothes, her favorite wool scarf, and the stuffed bear she carried everywhere. He drove her across town to his sister's house, a sturdier home built of stone at the edge of the river. His sister, Mary Ann, a woman in her 50s with black hair streaked with silver and a stern but loving gaze, answered the door in her heavy brown coat. Without many words, Jack placed Emily in her care. Emily clung to his neck for a moment, whispering, "Daddy, when will you come back?" He kissed her forehead, his voice steady though his heart trembled. "Soon, my girl. Stay safe." Marianne's expression told him she understood far more than Emily did. When Jack returned to the cabin alone, the town lay hushed beneath twilight. The snow reflected the pale glow of the moon, turning the woods into a silver labyrinth of shadows. The air was sharp, cutting each breath, and his boots crunched loudly in the drifts, as if warning the world of his presence. He mounted the porch steps, fatigue weighing on him, but the moment his foot touched the wooden planks, something inside him bristled. The snow that blanketed the path to his door was no longer smooth and untouched. It was crushed, trampled, dappled with imprints that had not been there before. He crouched, running his gloved hand across the indentations. They were boot prints, heavy and deep, circling the porch in deliberate patterns. Someone had walked around his cabin, not once but several times, studying, perhaps waiting. Jack's eyes followed the trail outward, where the prints merged with parallel lines carved into the snow, the tracks of a vehicle. The tire marks were fresh, pressed firm into the earth before vanishing into the dense tree line, swallowed by the forest's darkness. His stomach tightened, the bitter taste of certainty on his tongue. They were already watching him. Rex's reaction confirmed what Jack already knew. The German shepherd lowered his head, hackles rising, lips pulling back to reveal sharp teeth glinting in the cold moonlight. His growl was low, vibrating through the boards beneath their feet, his amber eyes fixed on the shadows beyond the tree line. Snow dusted his back as he stepped toward the edge of the porch, sniffing the air with sharp, deliberate breaths. He was no longer the playful companion of Emily, but the hardened protector Jack had relied on in darker days. Jack laid a hand on his neck, feeling the taut muscle quivering with restrained violence. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by the moan of the wind curling through the branches. Jack straightened slowly, his hand tightening around the heavy flashlight he carried. The beam cut through the dark as he flicked it on, a pale circle sweeping across the yard, tracing the tracks, illuminating the broken crust of snow. His chest rose and fell with steady discipline, though the pulse in his neck betrayed his tension. He had lived through ambushes before, had smelled danger even when unseen, and this was no different. Danger was here, cloaked in shadows and waiting for the right moment. The air seemed thicker, every second stretching long, and Jack felt the weight of being hunted settle over his shoulders. He thought of Emily, safe for now in Marianne's care, and the decision to separate from her felt like both a wound and a shield. He could not allow Morton's men to reach her, not when they had already dared to trespass upon his threshold. Rex's growl deepened, vibrating like distant thunder. Jack raised the flashlight higher, its trembling glow catching the jagged bark of the trees and the gleam of ice hanging from their branches. Yet nothing moved. The forest stared back, unblinking, its silence a trap. Reaching for his phone, Jack dialed the precinct, his voice low but firm as he spoke to the duty officer. He requested that patrol units stay alert, that his call should be treated as a signal for immediate response if he gave the word. The man on the other end hesitated, then promised reinforcement if needed. Jack ended the call, sliding the phone back into his pocket, his other hand never leaving the flashlight. He had learned long ago that allies were too far away when enemies stood at your door. And so he waited. He and Rex stood together on the porch, breath steaming, bodies outlined by the faint light spilling from the cabin's window. Jack's eyes remained fixed on the darkness where the tracks had disappeared, while Rex's ears twitched at every distant crack and whisper. The forest loomed vast and menacing, the snow-covered branches drooping low like claws. Time passed slowly, each gust of wind carrying the illusion of footsteps, each shadow deepening the certainty that this night was not yet done. In the frozen stillness, man and dog became statues of vigilance. Jack's shoulders were square, his gaze steady, his pulse drumming against the cold air, while Rex crouched low, ready to spring at a moment's notice. Together they stood against the night, the cabin behind them glowing faintly like the last bastion of warmth in a land gripped by frost. The danger had not yet struck, but it lingered close, wrapping the woods in dread. The snow muffled all sound, yet beneath its quiet veil, Jack felt the promise of violence pressing nearer with every breath. The following night fell heavy upon Silver Creek, cloaking the mountains and valleys beneath a veil of white that glittered faintly beneath the moon. The storm had not returned in full, yet the wind still carried a mournful howl, rattling the branches against one another like skeletal hands. Inside the wooden cabin, the fire hissed softly, its glow painting Jack's weathered face in flickering shades of orange and shadow. He sat still, shoulders broad and posture tense, staring into the flames as though searching for answers in their dance. Across the room, Rex lay at the door, his massive frame stretched low, but every muscle taut, his ears rigid and twitching at every sound that dared disturb the night. The silence was deceptive, wrapping the cabin in a fragile comfort. Jack had lived too long to be fooled by it. His instincts told him that danger was not far, that the tracks in the snow from the night before had not been idle wanderings. His mind replayed the faces of men he had known in war, men who waited for darkness, who struck when fear and fatigue were thickest. He set down the coffee cup that had long gone cold, his eyes narrowing as the faintest glow appeared between the trees outside. At first, it was only a shimmer, a trick of the night, but then it grew. Twin beams cutting through the forest, headlights slicing across the snow like knives. Jack's breath stilled. The hum of an engine, muffled by distance, became undeniable. A vehicle crawled slowly toward the cabin, its lights flickering through the lattice of branches. Rex sprang to his feet, a low growl erupting from his chest, the sound vibrating against the wood. Jack rose, every movement measured, and crossed the room to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to see. Shadows moved within the forest, heavy boots crunching the snow, deliberate and merciless in rhythm. Morton's men had come. Jack's jaw set, his pulse steadying with a soldier's clarity. He reached for the phone, his voice calm as he relayed his position to the sheriff's office. "They're here," he said simply. "Send everyone you've got." The dispatcher's response was drowned by Rex's sudden snarl as footsteps pounded nearer. Jack set the phone down, grabbed the heavy flashlight in one hand and an old hunting rifle in the other, though he knew the true fight would be close, suffocating, personal. He turned toward Rex, nodding once, the silent command passing between them. The dog's amber eyes glinted with the fire's reflection, wild and ready. The first strike came without warning. The cabin door, sturdy but aged, shuddered under the force of a boot. Wood splintered, the iron hinges groaned, and before Jack could take 2 steps forward, the door burst inward with a thunderous crack. Snow and cold air exploded into the room, carrying with them the shadowed forms of 3 men, their faces hard, their eyes burning with the ruthless determination of predators. They were dressed in dark coats, hoods pulled low, each one armed with the crude confidence of those who lived by violence. One carried a shotgun, its barrel gleaming in the dim light. Another wielded a crowbar, while the third clutched a blade with twitching eagerness. Chaos erupted in the span of a heartbeat. Jack lunged, the rifle clashing against the crowbar with a metallic shriek, sparks flying in the firelight. His training surged back in muscle memory, feet planted firm, every strike deliberate, each movement guided by years of combat honed in harsher places than this. Rex launched himself into the fray, his teeth sinking into the arm of the man with the shotgun, dragging him to the ground with terrifying force. The man screamed, the weapon clattering away as Rex shook violently, pinning him down with raw fury. The air filled with the roar of struggle. Wood splintered as furniture toppled, the table crashing against the wall, flames flaring as sparks leapt from the hearth. Jack twisted, driving his elbow into the jaw of the man with the crowbar, sending him staggering back, blood spraying from his lip. But the man with the blade lunged, slashing wildly, the steel hissing past Jack's face by inches. Jack caught his wrist, the two of them grappling in a deadly dance, the blade trembling between them, so close that Jack felt its icy breath against his throat. His muscles strained, his teeth clenched as he forced the weapon away, the cabin echoing with their grunts and curses. The smell of gunpowder and burning wood soon mingled, acrid and choking. A shot rang out from outside, shattering glass as a bullet pierced the window frame, spraying shards into the fight. The world seemed consumed by violence, shadows clashing, growls and shouts rising into a storm of human fury. Rex dragged the shotgun wielder across the floor, blood smearing against the boards as the man screamed in agony. Jack, summoning the last surge of strength, twisted the knife wielder's arm until the blade clattered to the floor. He shoved the man into the wall, his body striking with a sickening thud, the breath knocked from him. Still, the fight pressed on. The man with the crowbar roared, swinging again, smashing into the wooden table, splinters flying. Jack ducked, rolled, and drove his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him sprawling. Every inch of the cabin now reeked of sweat, smoke, and blood, the walls shaking as though they too bore the violence. Rex's growl filled the space, guttural and relentless, his jaws refusing to release the man beneath him. And then, just as Jack felt the odds tip toward collapse, salvation came riding on the wind. The distant wail of sirens pierced the forest, faint at first, but rising, swelling until it roared above the chaos. Red and blue lights flickered against the snow outside, painting the night in warning. Morton's men froze for a split second, their confidence breaking beneath the sound that spelled their capture. Jack did not hesitate. He slammed the crowbar from the man's hands, pinned him to the floor, and kicked the blade aside. The door burst again, this time not with enemies, but with allies. Officers stormed in, rifles raised, their shouts commanding order. The men were dragged from the wreckage of the fight, one spitting blood, another groaning in pain, the third clutching his mauled arm as Rex finally released his grip with a guttural snarl. Jack stood amidst the destruction, chest heaving, eyes sharp as he watched Morton himself being forced into the light outside. The man was broad, with graying hair and a cruel sneer carved into his features, but tonight the sneer faltered as iron cuffs closed around his wrists. Snow continued to fall, soft and relentless, as the flashing lights bathed the cabin. The chaos subsided, leaving only the crackle of the fire and the acrid scent of smoke. Rex padded back to Jack's side, his muzzle flecked with blood, his eyes still burning but his body trembling with exhaustion. Jack rested a hand on his head, silent gratitude passing between them. The danger had been real, the fight nearly overwhelming, but they had endured. Morton's empire had sent its men into the storm, and the storm had swallowed them whole. The days that followed the violent storm inside the cabin passed in a strange quietness, as if Silver Creek itself was exhaling after holding its breath too long. Snow continued to fall thickly from the heavens, drifting across rooftops and swallowing roads in a gentle silence, yet it no longer carried the same weight of fear. Where once the storm concealed shadows of violence and whispers of death, now it seemed to soften the town in a blanket of safety. Morton and his men were gone, their threat bound in chains, and though scars lingered in the broken doorways and the charred scent of wood still clung faintly to the cabin, the people of Silver Creek began to feel something they had not felt in many winters: peace. On a morning pale with frost, Jack stepped out into the snow with Rex at his side and Emily bounding happily just ahead of them. Jack's broad shoulders were wrapped in his old field jacket, his breath rising in steady clouds, his expression calm but marked with quiet thought. Rex trotted close, his sable coat glistening under the soft light, the steady rhythm of his paws leaving prints that Emily delighted in jumping across. Emily, her blonde hair bouncing beneath her wool hat, laughed as she skipped along the snowy path, her scarf trailing like a banner of joy. They moved down the town's main street, a simple road lined with shops and houses, every window glowing faintly with hearth fires inside. The townsfolk noticed them as they passed, not with cheers or shouts, but with the small gestures that carried greater weight. A shopkeeper sweeping snow paused to nod with a smile, his eyes lingering with respect. A mother holding her child waved gently, her gratitude unspoken but deeply felt. An older man leaning on his cane tipped his hat as Jack passed, his weathered face softening for the first time in weeks. None cried out their names or demanded stories of what had been done. Instead, Silver Creek answered with silence, a reverence that lay heavy in the air, acknowledgement in every glance and gesture. For Jack, it was enough. He had never been a man who sought medals or words carved on stone. The war had taught him that true acts of courage were rarely seen, often misunderstood, and almost always left to fade quietly. As he walked, his gaze softened on Emily, whose laughter rang like bells above the snow, her innocence unbroken by the violence he had fought to keep away. He rested a hand briefly on Rex's strong back, feeling the steady thrum of loyalty beneath the thick coat of fur. Together, they were ordinary in appearance, a veteran, a child, and a dog, yet extraordinary in what they had endured. That evening, as the storm thickened again outside, the cabin glowed with firelight, warm against the chill that pressed against its walls. Jack sat near the hearth, polishing a tool in silence, while Emily curled on the rug, tracing patterns with her finger on Rex's belly as the dog lay content beside her. The knock on the E2. Doctor startled none of them, for the sound was gentle, unlike the violence that had shattered the same wood nights before. Jack rose slowly and opened it to find Officer Constance Hale standing there, wrapped in a long coat against the cold. Her face was paler than he remembered, marked by healing bruises and a thin scar across her temple where the glass had cut her. Yet her eyes, dark and steady, carried strength, the kind of strength that came not only from survival, but from a refusal to be broken. She was 36, weathered not by age but by the burden of her work, and as she stood on the porch, her expression softened into gratitude rarely shown. "I owed you this," she said simply, her voice still hoarse, and stepped inside at his silent nod. She crossed the room, her boots leaving small patches of snow behind, and stopped before Rex. The German shepherd rose, ears twitching, tail wagging gently as if recognizing her scent. She smiled faintly, lowering herself to one knee, and placed her hand on his head, fingers sinking into his thick fur. "If it weren't for you two," she said, glancing between Jack and Rex, "I wouldn't be here, not alive, not standing." Her lips quivered with a rare smile, one that broke through her stern exterior, and her eyes gleamed with unspoken emotion. Emily bounded forward, her small arms wrapping tightly around Rex's neck. The dog endured the embrace with patient calm, his amber eyes warm in the glow of the fire. Emily looked up at the officer, her cheeks flushed with excitement. "Rex always knows," she said proudly, her voice innocent and full of certainty. "He always saves people." Constance chuckled softly, a sound Jack realized was rare for her, and nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her gaze steady on the dog. "And so does your father." The evening lingered in warmth and quiet conversation, though few words were needed. Gratitude hung in the air, heavier than smoke, filling the small cabin with a peace greater than silence. When Constance finally rose to leave, she placed her gloved hand on Jack's shoulder, her grip firm, eyes meeting his in unspoken understanding. No medals, no headlines, no parade awaited him, only this shared acknowledgement between survivors, between those who had seen too much and still endured. Later, as Emily drifted to sleep before the fire, her arms wrapped loosely around her stuffed bear, Jack sat back with Rex stretched at his feet. The storm outside continued, snow tapping softly against the glass, yet inside was only warmth. He looked at his daughter, at his loyal companion, and felt a rare sense of completion. They were not celebrated as heroes in the way stories often promised, but they did not need to be. Silver Creek was safe, the town breathed easier, and the world, at least in this small corner, was right again. The story closed not with the roar of sirens or the clash of violence, but with the steady crackle of fire, the contented sigh of a child asleep and the presence of a loyal dog guarding his family. A veteran scarred by war, a shepherd bound by loyalty, and a child untouched by cruelty, 3 ordinary lives woven together into a reason for hope. They were not heroes in the eyes of history, yet for Silver Creek, they were enough to bring back trust, safety, and the fragile gift of faith in tomorrow. The story of Jack, little Emily, and their loyal dog Rex reminds us that love, loyalty, and silent sacrifice are often the quiet forces that hold families and communities together. A father's courage, a child's innocence, and the devotion of a faithful companion show that even in the darkest storms, compassion can bring light. These moments of humanity may pass without recognition, yet they are the reason hope survives. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone close to you, leave a comment to express your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next story of courage and faith. May God bless you and your family for believing in kindness and love.